Welcome. Namaste, beautiful souls. Welcome back to my personal journey through the Tarot de Marseille. And today I'm going to share with you some reflections on the 13th Arcanum, the Key 13. And this one is a really perhaps of all of the cards we've looked at so far, the one where at least I can find most correspondences to more esoteric reflections. Perhaps more of a, at the same time, a matter of fact approach to what this card represents. I'm not quite sure where to begin, so I'm just going to, let's remove these two. I want to start with the black soil, the dark soil, and this is the Noble here. And this deck, I believe, is the Gassman Tarot. I have to turn it over. Yes, that's the Gassman Tarot. This is the Bendov deck. And this is Jean-Pierre Payen, The Restoration by Flournoy. And as I was reading about this card and thinking about the black soil, and it's funny, a post came up recently on my YouTube feed about simplifying your composting process and not having to have a large container to turn your compost in. Rather than that, just digging a hole and burying your compost and turning your soil if you have a garden to do that in. And this particular YouTube creator was just talking about how rich and beautiful and black her soil is from all of this composting. And so I'm thinking about this card and its contemporary association with Scorpio and the blackness of Scorpio, the blackness of the dark sea into which we dive to excavate our journey to heal, to be born again, to live. And I'm just, all of these little pieces are starting to click into place. And so I really want to have a look at that today and maybe find some new words and a different approach to this particular card, because it is symbol rich and I think has a powerful message coming in the middle of the major arcana. So first of all, let me introduce you to the decks that are on the table, and then I want to talk about the scythe. All right, so many of you have seen, I've used these decks many times. So on horseback, we have the Fine della Torre, and also the Minchieri deck that I have is the Minchieri El Signo, and this is one of the collectible Lo Scarabeo decks. And then this is one of the cards from the Jacques Vieille I have. There's two versions of each card in that deck. This one is the Gassman Tarot, the Bendov, Noble, and this one is Jean-Pierre Payen. So the scythe. I think my reflections of the scythe first became I think my awareness really deepened as I studied my journey, as my journey with Lenormand increased, because the scythe is one of the cards in Lenormand. And it is such a powerful symbol. It is both a cutter and a reaper. And the swiftness of the action with the scythe, I think this is one of the messages that became really clear with me, is that, it can't be undone. Once you wield the scythe, especially if that blade is sharp, you need to be careful where you swing it and how you do it, because you can't uncut what you cut. And if you want to use that as a metaphor for words, because of that sword word anagram, I think it's a really important lesson. And the scythe in this particular card, again, seems to be doing both. It is possibly reaping as well as it is cutting, and it is turning the soil over. It is helping with the composting process, the perhaps excavating of things that are deep within the earth as well too, because we see various things within the soil in different decks here. So I think we need to really have a deep look at the question that is being asked. Because if this is a reaper, it is digging something up or revealing something in the soil that either needs to be revisited so that it can be released, or simply in the process of turning over. And so there's this energy of renewal. And there's been a lot of correspondences that have come to the surface lately, quite literally. And I'm thinking about how the Herb Crafter Tarot organizes that deck. And the composting plants, I believe, are the number 10s. So all of the number 10s are important for composting and revitalizing your soil. Now, this is a 13, that is a 10, but the idea here is much the same, in that this is a card of processing, right? It's a card of turning something over. The skeleton is so interesting because it's not a skeleton, right? It is flesh colored. It has other colors on it. There's certain colors that draw our attention to its vitalness. I was going to say vital life forces. I think symbolically, the colors that are there we can look at for meaning. And it's very much alive and active. And whether it is riding a horse or it is reaping something in the soil, it is quite active. So it is in the process of doing something. So there's all of these layers. And then, of course, there is the historical I think as well too, this became more apparent in our recent history with the COVID pandemic and how real life and death became, and the harsh reality of pandemics and illness, and something perhaps that was once more familiar came back, and really kind of shook things up and got us to look at life in a new way and perhaps reprioritize and think about how we manage life day to day. And the process of life and death, the process of composting and recycling and turning things over, also is about the process of, it's also about recognizing that which needs to die will die, and that which still has to be explored will continue to thrive or come back. And this is such a deep and powerful concept that we can take at many different levels. So if we look at this as a Scorpio journey, as the part of our journey where each and every one of us have things that unseemingly come to the surface for us to examine, or we are in a deep process of healing in our self journey and we are actually doing the excavating ourselves. This is very closely connected to that, and perhaps one of the very best zodiacal correspondences in the tarot when we're looking at it through the lens of the Golden Dawn. Yet this meaning is still here in these older cards. And of course, we can have a discussion of which way the rider is riding, or death is cultivating or reaping. And yet that is also open to interpretation and possible printing errors as well too. However, in a reading, whatever death is gathering, facing, we will be collecting and examining and cultivating, and it will be coming to the forefront. You may also feel strongly that an indication of what is ready to be, cut out of your life. So how did this card become associated with death? And why the title Death, when actually I would say this is much closer to a card such as this one, which is from the Osho Zen Tarot, which is about our personal transformation. There are a few contemporary decks that I believe that have a phoenix on them, something like that. And I think that as a reader, I feel like I'm often backpedaling with this card. And, we say things like, oh yeah, we have a bunch of tiny deaths every day. But I'm thinking now that this card is not about death. It's about cultivating our challenges and our traumas. And I want to read you a little bit from the white book that accompanies the Noble Tarot, this one here. Actually, maybe I'll read you the whole thing. Trump 13. focuses on the rediscovery of one's personal history. A skeleton works with a scythe. This image is just an analogy. The dead parts of the individual must be swept away in order to eliminate all repetitive neurotic behavior. I'm going to skip on to this other part that was so good. The individual must retrieve from the depths of his inner graveyard the separated or broken pieces and reassemble them. He must rid himself of all his buried sufferings and set off afresh. He delves into the most obscure and intense perceptions in order to bring all these fragmented wounds back to light. This black soil is the humus formed of all the individual's decomposing matter. He must relive, see, understand, and pardon. To retrieve an attempted abortion, painful birth, or failed weaning is no longer traumatic when one is 30 or 40 years old. With the passage of time comes a sense of perspective. The destructive power of this distant trauma can at last fade away, allowing the recuperation of the energy it once held captive. It is at this moment that the past memories become accessible. The veil is suddenly torn away. The individual sees that he is part of the universe, connected with the all. He leaves his solitude behind at last. He catches sight of the immensity of life and reunites with the rest of the world. This transforms his daily existence. And so we are all in various stages of catch and release and re-examine and release of our individual traumas, some which are more current than others. But perhaps the death picture of this card is that let's do the work so that we can let this go and compost and recycle. The implication here is that it needs to come to the surface in order to release it. So we need to see it, acknowledge it. Sometimes that's enough. Maybe we need to take it out and have a closer examination. And then we can put it back in the soil and let it decompose. And I think it's through this card that I really want to let this meaning be the pervasive interpretation when I'm reading with a contemporary card. I think it's really ambitious what Waite wanted to do in his deck. This is such a symbolic, rich card. But I also want to note that the skeleton on a white horse is not something new, that this was part of older drawings. Now, we don't have a scythe on this card, unfortunately. That would kind of make this all perfect. But we do have the white rose as a symbol of peace and resurrection. And I wonder now, looking at this card, if all we're looking at is an examination of the bits and pieces of our life. And wherever our attention is drawn to the card, that might be the piece, right? That needs revisiting. J.M. David in his book talks about 3 heads. His observation is that there are 3 heads in this picture. There is the one that is crowned, and this will vary from deck to deck a little bit, and one that is uncrowned. One is masculine, one is feminine, and then the 3rd head is the head that is on the skeleton. And that is very similar to the 3 figures that are in the Judgment card, in the 20th Arcanum, the double X card. That this figure is very active, much like the child in that card, and then these 2 are like the adults that are in that card. And so there's a lot of, I think, continuity among the cards in the Tarot de Marseille. One thing that also, let me get another deck here. And that I want to check across any deck that I'm working with is to see whether the Fool and Death are, what kind of pattern they have. So let's compare. So this is the Bendov deck, and we can see that Death and the Fool are an interesting reflection of one another. That the Scythe perhaps is a transformation of the cane. And so we have this conversation that we can bring in between the Fool and Death and Judgment. And in all of these cases, we are moving through our personal stuff, excavating, examining, releasing, and being born anew. So there's something kind of powerful there. Now, what would be, what I wouldn't want to see in a tarot deck is that the Fool and this is what happens in this contemporary deck, I believe, because the Fool in the Waite-Smith deck goes the other way. So this pattern was lost in the Waite-Smith, unfortunately, because that would have been really cool if we could carry that through from Tarot de Marseille to Waite-Smith, but that's not the case. So you can look at the various iterations of the older decks that you have and just double check that if the Death card is going to the left, that the Fool is going in the same direction. So I do have this one here as well too. So let's have a look and see what that looks like. And then I think lastly, there's something really funny about the head of the skeleton. And you might want to contrast this. Yeah. Now, we can't do that with the Noble, because in the Noble, they are walking towards one another, which changes the pattern. Okay. So not in the Noble, but in all of these other decks here, okay, so in these 3 anyway, this is the Bendov, Payen, and Gassman. Look at what's going on in the head. we kind of have a crescent moon frame around the head. And then we have this other piece that holds the back of the face, and it's more of a face than a skeleton. So you may read something into that crescent moon shape. And it is part, I believe, of a larger story of what you might read into the connection of and the coloring of the pelvis, the root with the spine, and then the crescent moon up around the head. And when those of you that have worked with me know that I've done lots of chakra studying and chakra sadhana, and so this is very interesting and familiar for me. And looking at the relationship between knees and sacrum. Now we need to be a little bit careful here in interpretation because these are in different places, and I don't want to get too petty and nitpicky here, but there are connections between root chakra and knees. We can certainly build that in even with the sacral chakra, because if the knees are connected to Saturn, there's this metaphor of moving through restriction, moving through the eye of the needle, moving through obstacles, and that those points in the body are accentuated with red. And I think our attention is meant to be drawn there. So not only is this a card that is of recycling and composting and excavating our trauma, our attention is also drawn to these body parts or energetic centers that are focused on moving through challenge. And it's interesting that these lower chakras are so deeply connected to ancestral wounds and ancestral trauma and the connection between our personal stuff and our ancestral stuff. So I am really, really fascinated in looking at this in a whole new way. And I'm not sure where or how I'm going to incorporate that. And I just feel that this card, this is an amazing card to use as a tarot teacher because there's a lot of symbols we can carry through from card to card. And I do appreciate the pillars of the moon being here and the connection of this card to the moon. So we connect the Scorpio journey to the Pisces journey, and all of that gets connected. So that's kind of cool. But I do appreciate the simplicity of this card a lot. And there was one other little thing I wanted to mention. Okay, I need to get my pointer. In Jodorowsky's book, and Jodorowsky's deck, right here, there's a bone on the ground, and here it's colored red. Here it is yellow. Here we don't see it. We certainly don't see it in the Waite Smith. And I guess it's here in yellow. Now in the Jodorowsky deck, which is based on the Conver deck, and I need to get a Conver deck, like another restoration of a Conver deck, because he has 7 little holes on this bone, and the bone is colored white. And he builds in more esoteric meaning to this bone that's on the ground here that looks a little bit like a flute. So I think I'm going to look for another restoration of a conver deck and just see if that is something that, because, I'm sure most of you have read that Jodorowsky book, and there's a lot of little tiny details that seem to appear only in his interpretation and not in other books. So I want to investigate that. Hello, Dee. What have you got for us here? It has just struck me. The headgear of the skeleton looks like the bandage used to keep the jaws closed on a corpse. Huh. Well, isn't that interesting? Okay, well, I will have to think about that some more. So all I can do is say thank you. This is brilliant. It's so brilliant. And I think at a, just past midpoint of the major arcana, it's really important, to stir up all the stuff. If we don't continue to do that, then, we kind of go along thinking everything is just fine. But we need to revisit our darkness. We need to revisit the unprocessed trauma. And I know from experience, it can be just like that. It can be dealt with. Other times it needs a little more space. But sometimes it's just a matter of looking at it. And then you go, oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't actually let that go. Or whatever it is you need to do. So kind of a really important card to come along halfway through. Yeah. A Christmas Carol is such a deep tale to look at. And I often refer to it when I'm looking at the tarot. And I find it, I see aspects of Dickens' work in other cards as well too. Even in the Tarot de Marseille, for sure. The King of Pentacles is one that has always been a Dickens card to me. Yeah. Okay. Well, let me know if you have other insights into this card. And as always, I will reply to your comments, and I look forward to this ongoing conversation. And next up will be Temperance. I'll see you then. Take good care. And thank you, Dee. Namaste.